Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Werwace, and I'm the town of Chatham's representative on the Columbia County Environmental Management Council. The council is an advisory group for the Board of Supervisors on environmental and conservation issues. And we are also the sponsor, one of the lead sponsors of the natural resources inventory that we're going to be trained on tonight. And I'm very excited because I've not been trained on it yet, and so I'm looking forward to that. I had a career in conservation, so I know the value of data in making decisions. So everybody enjoy, and if you have any questions, use the chat, I guess, right? Okay, terrific.
So our first presenter is Gretchen Stevens, and Gretchen is the director of the Biodiversity Resources Center at Hudsonia, and Gretchen is one of the chief authors of the Columbia County Natural Resources Inventory. She's going to present an overview of the content and has just a jam-packed set of slides, so I'm not going to take any more time in introduction, but just hand it over to Gretchen.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. So, hello everyone. I'm going to just give a very quick overview of the Natural Resources Inventory, but then I'm going to focus on demonstrating how to use the NRI when you are conducting an environmental review or designing a subdivision or some other kind of land use, or doing some other kind of planning for land uses. A very similar process can be used for large-scale projects such as municipal comprehensive planning or open space planning, or other kinds of assessment of Columbia County landscapes. So what kind of resources are covered in the NRI? Certainly water resources, including streams, lakes, ponds, and groundwater. Minerals, including those we have mined in the past and those that we continue to mine. Plants and animals of the county and their habitats, including wetland and upland habitats of all kinds. Farmland and good farmland soils. Scenic areas that are visible from public places throughout the county, and recreation resources that are available to the public. So how are these resources covered? There are maps and descriptions of natural resources. There are discussions of past and present uses by people. The services that natural resources provide to the people of the county. Threats to resources of conservation concern. Basic conservation principles that can be applied by landowners, by public agencies, and by conservation organizations, and recommendations for sustainable uses and ideas for local policy, procedures, and legislation that can help to protect resources of conservation concern. At the core of the NRI is a series of 40 maps depicting the distribution of resources in the county. I'm not going to show you all of them, but just want to give you a taste of what's there and how the mapped information can be useful to you. The text of the NRI describes the resources shown in each of the maps in their significance to people. This map shows the general elevation ranges in the county. The dark red areas are the highest, then descending to the orange and yellow areas, mostly in the eastern half of the county. The lowest elevations are in the western half, all the way down to sea level at the Hudson River. Here's a map of the bedrock geology, which shows that much of the eastern part of the county is underlain by shale, gneiss, and schist. Those are the blues. of various shades. And then sandstone becomes more prominent along with shale and slate in the western half. Those are the shades of gray. The areas in yellows, oranges, and reds are places where marble, limestone, and dolostone bedrock and other calcareous rocks occur. These are the places that support some of our more unusual habitats, such as fens or calcareous ledges, with some of our rarest species of plants and animals. This map shows the unconsolidated aquifers in the 10 towns, the gray shaded towns, where the New York Rural Water Association has conducted town-specific groundwater studies. The aquifer areas are places where large volumes of easily accessible groundwater are held in sand and gravel deposits, and where groundwater is readily recharged from precipitation and snowmelt through the coarse material, but also where the groundwater is most vulnerable to contamination from our activities on the surface. So this map can alert us to the places where we may especially want to minimize impervious surfaces that would obstruct that groundwater recharge, and where we would want to avoid using toxic substances on the ground surface that could seep substantially unfiltered into the groundwater. This map shows the results of water quality surveys conducted by the DEC through 2007. Many of our streams appear to be in decent shape, those in blue, but problems were detected in the streams and ponds that are in dark green, orange, and red. The NRI appendix includes the data sheets that explain the known or suspected causes of the water quality problems for each stream segment. A map like this can help us identify the places where land uses may be harming the stream so that we can begin to fix those problems. This map shows what are called the areas of known importance identified by the New York Natural Heritage Program. These include the known locations of rare plants, rare animals, and exemplary ecological communities, and the parts of the landscape deemed to be important for their continued persistence. The light blue corridors that you see along some of the streams indicate the places that may be most important for protecting our sensitive cold water stream habitats, the kinds of habitats that support trout and other aquatic animals that need clear, cold streams and that disappear from streams that have been subjected to thermal pollution or contaminated by, for example, fertilizers or pesticides, or by salt or sand washing off the roads. There are a number of rare plants and animals that occur along the Hudson River or its tidal wetlands, or along the Hudson River shore. The Atlantic and short-nosed sturgeons use this part of the river. And bald eagle nests in trees on the shoreline and feeds on fish and other river-associated animals. There are a number of other rarities that occur in the Hudson River-associated habitats. The orange areas in the southeast part of the county, Copiague and Ancrum, indicate the known locations of rare animals of the Taconic Ridge and the calcareous wetlands of the Harlem Valley. For example, the bog turtle is an endangered species in New York, and its core habitat here is the calcareous fens that occur in this part of the county. Unfortunately, many of the fens that may once have supported this turtle have been rendered unsuitable for the turtles due to the effects of runoff from farm fields and other adjacent areas that carry fertilizers and manure from crop fields and pastures and lawns. The DEC has identified 23 significant biodiversity areas in the Hudson Valley, and 3 of them occur partially in Columbia County. These are the big colored blobs on this map: the upper Hudson River in purple, the Taconic Mountains in green, and the Harlem Valley calcareous wetlands in orange. These areas were designated because of the known concentrations of rare plants and animals, and high quality, and in some cases, rare ecological communities, and their support of the water and biological resources of other parts of the landscape. Several maps of the NRI depict the predicted effects of sea level rise on the shoreline areas of the Hudson. For example, this map shows the areas that are likely to be flooded at different levels of sea level rise. The dark blue is the current extent of tidal flooding, and the purples are the areas that would be flooded if sea level rises 24 or 48 inches. Those are some of the predicted changes through this century, depending on different climate change scenarios and different rates of sea level rise. The Columbia County Agriculture and Farmland Protection Board conducted an assessment of the agricultural importance of farmland in the county to identify and prioritize lands that should be protected from non-farm uses. This map shows the results of that assessment. The darkest green land areas are the ones deemed to be the highest priority for farmland conservation. Other maps show things such as surficial geology, watersheds and subbasins, flood zones, active river areas, habitats, large forests, large meadows, wetlands, and there are many more. All of these maps are in the NRI, and the map layers are also viewable on the Columbia County GIS Data Viewer. In session 2 of this program on this coming Wednesday, Don Meltz with the County Planning Department will show you all the ins and outs of finding what you need to on this very nice web map. In addition to the maps and descriptions of natural resources, the NRI also includes descriptions of habitats, lists of plants and animals of conservation concern, lots of recommendations for effective conservation, and lots of ideas for voluntary and regulatory protections of resources of concern. The NRI also has discussions of some of the threats to natural resources in the county, such as climate change, pollution of water and soils, fragmentation of habitats, infestations by non-native invasive species of plants and animals, human-subsidized wildlife, loss of farmland, and others. The NRI also sets forth some of the basic conservation principles that are generally agreed upon by ecologists and other scientists, and the kinds of measures that can be most effective for ensuring that the water, soils, and biological resources that support ecosystems and the human community can persist here. Some of these measures for protecting water resources, for example, are maintaining forested landscapes, minimizing applications of de-icing salts and pesticides and fertilizers, minimizing impervious surfaces, maintaining buffer zones along streams and around wetlands, carefully managing stormwater in developed areas, and avoiding construction in flood zones and removing existing structures in flood zones wherever possible. For protecting biological resources, measures such as identifying sensitive areas early in the siting, design, and planning for new development, minimizing habitat fragmentation, and maintaining broad connections between habitat areas and broad buffer zones around sensitive areas of all kinds. For protecting farmland resources, measures such as adopting right to farm legislation in municipalities where that kind of protection doesn't already exist. Protecting active farmland and good farmland soils wherever possible. Reducing tax assessments for active farms. Collaborating with farmers to build local markets, to find grant opportunities to fund environmental improvements, and for farmers themselves, employing practices that conserve water, prevent soil erosion, and build living soils. Those are just some examples of the kinds of measures that are listed in the NRI. Most of our natural resources receive very little or no protection from the state or federal government, so it really is up to municipalities to determine what resources are most important to their communities and what kinds of local action or legislation can ensure that those resources continue to serve the community. The kinds of resources that can be addressed in local legislation include, for example, wetlands, to extend protection to all the many wetlands that are not protected by the state or federal laws, extend protection to streams in similar ways, protect drinking water sources and other surface water and groundwater sources, protecting habitats for rare species, protecting open space that's important to the community, protecting scenic areas. But any number of other resources and natural features can be protected by local legislation if they are deemed to be important to the public health and welfare. Ingrid will be talking about these and other means of resource protection in a few minutes. I want to talk now, though, specifically about how you might use the NRI for one specific purpose, like an environmental review of a proposed land development project. This you can use the same kind of procedure to review land on for a number of other purposes. So for this, though, I'm just going to walk through this and choose a site, the site where I have this red star, as a kind of case study. This is an area just in the northeast part of the town of Copake. So looking at the bedrock map, here a green star is at our study area. There's a close-up of it. This shows that the this site is underlain by limestone and dolostone bedrock. These are calcareous bedrocks that sometimes underlay areas with some very interesting habitats. This Surficial Geology map shows that this site is largely underlain by glacial outwash and glacial came deposits. These are fairly coarse materials, sands and gravels. This map shows the unconsolidated aquifers and shows that there is a high yield aquifer on this site and other aquifers of lower yield or unknown yield. That kind of thing can be very important when you're considering new land uses. This map shows the flood zones as identified by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and it does show a 100-year flood zone does extend into a part of the site. This map is one of surface water use classifications, and our study area does appear to have two streams on it. They are both trout streams, according to this map, and one of the streams, the one that runs along the west side of the site, has been identified as potentially good for trout spawning. These are some of our best streams, our best quality streams in the region. Trout need clear, cold water. For spawning, they need unsilted stream substrates. So this is the kind of stream that we might want to pay special attention to. Streams can be very easily disrupted by nearby land uses. This map shows wetlands as mapped on the state, and actually this one just shows the federal wetland maps. The wetlands are shown in the dark purple on this map. The lighter purple and the pink are areas of hydric soils, that is wetland soils or potentially wetland soils. Those are other areas where wetlands may occur. Wetlands, in fact, could occur at a number of other areas on this site. the wetland maps that are in the public domain do miss many of the wetlands in the landscape. This map shows large meadows, and our site actually has some of the largest meadows in the county. These are meadows. This is a whole part of a whole meadow complex of 250 acres and larger. Meadows can be, of course, very important for farming, and large meadows make certain kinds of farming much more viable economically. Large meadows are also very important for grassland breeding birds, which are a group of birds that have experienced declines in their populations in the Northeast in recent decades due to loss of habitat, among other things. The areas of known importance on this site, the light blue area, that corridor along the stream that runs through the northwest corner, is a corridor identified as a part of the landscape that will help to protect sensitive cold water stream habitat. This is a map of good farmland soils, and it shows that the site does have both prime farmland soils in the darkest brown and the lighter brown, and farmland soils of statewide importance. Much of the site is underlain by good farmland soils. This map is one of scenic resources in the town, and it shows that a good part of the site is part of a scenic zone that has been identified by the town of Copake as especially important. This zone along Route 22 that includes the views of farm fields and the views of the Taconic Mountains to the east. And this site has also been identified itself as a site of scenic value to members of the public that participated in a survey conducted by the Columbia Land Conservancy. So that's just a sampling of the kinds of things, the kinds of information you can get from the NRI that apply to a particular site. There are many more maps that you can draw on for this kind of review and analysis. So on this site, of course, an aerial photo is always a good thing to look at. But if you add to that a lot of the these layers of that you can obtain from the NRI, you can get a lot more information. These show some of the layers that I put on here from the county web map. And these, so what we have seen, just looking at those few maps, are a bunch of features that may pose some constraints on this site. For example, the limestone bedrock. It presents some potential for unusual habitats. It also presents some hazards for the groundwater in the site. Limestone bedrock often has cavities and fissures that allow contaminants from the ground surface to rapidly enter the groundwater. There are sand gravel deposits on the site. These can be very valuable for actually site construction of driveways and other kinds of development. They are also can be very important for turtle nesting. So if there are, for example, turtles, wood turtles using that part of the stream, the sand and gravel areas might be especially important to them. Unconsolidated aquifers, which can be themselves very vulnerable to contamination through the sand and gravel material. And these are also very important groundwater recharge areas. 100-year flood zone includes a part of the site. There are trout streams, including one trout spawning stream. There are wetlands on the site, including wetlands possibly that do not show up on wetland maps. The site has very large meadows. There is a rare animal nearby, which I didn't point out, but one of the important areas maps shows a rare animal location just south of this site. There are good farmland soils on large parts of the site, and it's part of an identified scenic zone. If we were actually doing this review, the next very important step, of course, would be to visit the site. You can gain a lot of valuable information from a site, and we encourage anyone reviewing a new project or a new kind of land use to visit the site. There are a lot of things you can see on the ground that are not visible from this kind of remote assessment. So how would this affect our considerations for the site design if this were, say, a subdivision proposal or some other development? Well, I would want to begin by asking the applicant to look for unusual habitats, such as perhaps some fens in some of those wetland areas, or calcareous ledges if there are rock outcrops on the site. I might suggest avoiding sand and gravel areas that might support turtle nests, and a biologist could maybe identify the places that might be most suitable for that kind of nesting. In aquifer areas, avoid or minimize impervious surfaces such as pavement or roofs or driveways, and prohibit any uses that might contaminate the groundwater. Prohibit new structures within the 100-year flood zone. That's a no-brainer, but structures would include, driveways as well as buildings. Establish broad buffer zones along the trout stream and the trout spawning stream. These would help to protect the stream water quality and habitat quality that may be sustaining trout and other sensitive organisms. Require that wetlands be delineated on the site and surveyed and mapped, and then establish broad buffer zones around those wetlands. Other considerations: as much as possible, avoid fragmentation of the large meadows to make sure that they can continue to be used for farming and that they can continue to be used by grassland breeding birds if those birds are present. Obtain information on the nearby rare animal that occurs just off-site in case there are habitats on-site that it may also be using. Minimize disturbance of the good farmland soils, and even if they have to be disturbed in some ways, because they are over much of the site, there might be ways that you can locate new development on the soils of lesser quality for farming. And minimize the visual impacts on the scenic corridor. That's the kind of thing that will be noticed by many members of the community. So when we are ordinarily presented with something like a subdivision proposal that simply divides up a property like this into new proposed lots, this kind of analysis can help you maybe think more creatively and think more about how to make the development fit with the features of concern on the property. I want to remind you that the NRI is available on the website of the Environmental Management Council, I think we have time for some questions. So I'm going to hand this back to Christine, who can tell us if questions have been submitted. Let's see, stop share.
Hi. Thank you, Gretchen. We do have some time for questions, and I don't see any in the chat, but I think we have, with this number of folks, you could use a reaction button to, put a symbol out there to let me know that you'd like to ask a question, and we can ask you to unmute. I see a question starting to come in the chat. How would you find more information on rare animals?
Yes, so there is some sensitivity around the locations of rare plants and animals, but if you see on this map, the map of areas of known importance, if you see an area where rare plants or animals are known to occur, and there is a good need to know what the animals are and what parts of the landscape they're using, you could get that information from the New York Natural Heritage Program or from the DEC, the regional office of the DEC. Both of those agencies and probably anyone else who works in the conservation field is careful about giving out this kind of information, because some rare animals and rare plants are collected illegally. Those kind of collections can have very bad impacts on the populations of those species. And there's, as you may know, there are black markets for especially things like rare reptiles and amphibians in some cases, and other animals and rare plants. So there's, if you have an important need to know if there's an impending land use that might be affecting the habitats for a rare species, by all means, inquire with the New York Natural Heritage Program or the DEC, and they can give you more information.
So there's another question. Was there mention of identifying land for solar development?
Well, that's interesting. Not really in the NRI, not really. We did include a map of solar irradiance throughout the county, and this is just a map showing the warm areas and cooler areas, the areas that might be better or possibly worse for things like developing solar farms. But it's extremely coarse, and it is really not a good resource for that, for actually locating better or worse areas. I would refer you to the work done by Scenic Hudson. I forget the name of their program, but if you go to their website, you can find an actual map application that's especially designed to help municipalities and solar farm developers and others identify some of the places that may be well suited for solar farm development, and that is maybe less impactful on some of the other resources of conservation concern.
And Ingrid posted a link to the Scenic Hudson solar mapping tool in the chat. And in the meantime, we have another question. Does the natural resources inventory identify archaeological sites?
No, it does not. And it's really for the same reason as it doesn't identify anything specific about rare species locations. Archaeological sites are also very sensitive. They are subject to looting. So the state and anyone who works on historic resources is usually very careful to keep those locations close to their chest unless there's an important need to know. So if there is an important need to know, the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation and Historic Preservation can give you that information.
And another question about how prime farmlands, in quotes, are determined. And there's an additional, can farming techniques improve land to become prime in that category of prime farmland?
Good question. I think the answer to the second question is probably no. And that's because the designation of prime farmland, it's based on a lot of things that are pretty intrinsic to the soils, the soil materials, the soil texture, the soil chemistry to some extent, the location of the area on the landscape setting, things that can't be changed by how you are actually treating the soil. That is not to say, though, that in some specific location, if you are paying close attention to adding organic matter and lots of other taking lots of other measures that improve the soil locally, that you couldn't have some create some excellent conditions for growing crops. Maybe a soil scientist could give you a better answer to that, but I know that many of the features that they use to define farmland soils are fairly intrinsic to the whole soil profile, and not simply the few inches within the rooting zone, and it also includes the aspects of the landscape setting.
So I see Ingrid Haeckel followed up, and another attendee commented about resources for exploring geologically sensitive areas. The State Historic Preservation Office Cultural Resource Information System. There's a link in the chat that Ingrid posted. And then historic and archaeological significance can be explored. And there's another link there in New York State Parks website. Those might actually be the same link. So two people got us to the same place. Great. As I'm scrolling and reading and talking at the same time. I think we have time for one more question that's already in the chat here. And this is asking about least impact or no impact, given kind of the myriad constraints identified. I think this refers to on the parcel of land that was explored in some detail. Is no development the answer? Are there sites in, places within that site where there's not a constraint of some kind? That's kind of the gist of the question, I think, more or less. Okay.
Yes. Yes, there were parts of that site that had fewer constraints, and certainly that is the kind of site where I'm sure you could, with a little work, figure out the places that would cause the least impact to the most sensitive resources, and keep the possibility for farming. The site is farmed now, the possibility for continued farming, and could protect a lot of the most sensitive areas. But those are larger questions that we can't really go deeply into. But there are some sites where the constraints are so complete and severe that they really should not be developed. There are a great many sites where you get this kind of combination of constraints, but you can still find ways and places to develop responsibly. Just if we have a second, I just opened the NRI to the page where prime farmland soils are actually defined in a way. These are soils that have the best combination of physical and chemical characteristics for producing food, feed, forage, fiber, and oilseed crops, and are also available for these uses. They are typically deep soils on level or nearly level land and are well drained, fertile, with high pH and high base cations, and stable. The soils have the soil quality, growing season, and moisture supply needed to produce economically sustained high yields of crops when treated and managed according to acceptable farming methods, and so forth. That's from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So it gives you some idea, which is not to say that you can't greatly improve some of the poorer soils and make them quite viable. So.
Thank you, Gretchen. And we are right on time to switch over to Ingrid Haeckel to present. And Ingrid is going to provide an overview of different ways of using natural resource inventories from different municipalities throughout the Hudson Valley.
Thanks, Christine. And thanks everyone for joining us this evening. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Ingrid Haeckel, and I'm a conservation and land use specialist with the DEC's Hudson River Estuary program. And I work through a partnership with Cornell University Department of Natural Resources, and have been doing a lot of work with communities across the region over the last 6 years on developing natural resource inventories, projects of all kind of range and size, from villages and cities to rural towns to countywide projects like this. So this is a really excellent example of a county level NRI, and I'll talk about just give you an overview of some different ways that you might use it from a municipal perspective. And I also just note that there's a lot of information in the inventory that I think is probably of interest to the general public more broadly and landowners. But first, just a quick background about the Estuary program. We're a special program at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, established to help people enjoy, protect, and revitalize the Hudson River and its valley. And we work throughout the 10 counties bordering the tidal Hudson on the, in the area in blue shown on the map on the right, to achieve many key benefits, including ensuring clean water, building community resilience to climate change, conserving the vital estuary ecosystem and its fish, wildlife, and habitats, conserving natural scenery of the river valley, and providing opportunities for education, access, recreation, and inspiration on the river. And within the Estuary program, I'm part of a conservation and land use team that works with local governments and other conservation partners to incorporate important natural areas and habitats into local planning and decision making. And so this evening, in this presentation, I'm going to tell you some different ways that you can use the County NRI now that it's complete. Starting off with adopting the NRI, so ways it can be used in site plan and subdivision reviews, and Gretchen already touched on that, how it can be applied to SEQR, establishment of critical environmental areas and conservation overlay zoning, comp planning, municipal level inventories, and open space planning. And as I go along, there are these little light blue bubbles on some of the slides with page numbers, and those are just referring to where there's additional information about these topics in the NRI report itself. So there's a nice overview of many of these things in the Columbia County NRI. So one of the most basic things that we hope you will do is to, excuse me, officially adopt the County NRI as a municipal planning reference. When it was completed 2 years ago, the County Board of Supervisors passed a resolution adopting the NRI for use at the county level. And I know at least one town, the town of New Lebanon, I believe, passed a similar resolution of support for using this information. And I think some others may have as well. So we do have an example of that type of resolution available. Passing that resolution doesn't create kind of any legal obligation to the town for what to do with the information in the inventory, but it does kind of signal official support for using the document, which may be symbolic, but we think it's worthwhile to encourage its use by your local review boards. And we also really strongly recommend adding links to the County NRI and the Geodata portal, the mapping portal that we'll be introducing on Wednesday evening, to your town website. Those could be links through the planning board's page or your CAC if you have one, or wherever people from the public may be looking for municipal planning documents might be a good place to link to it. Beyond a resolution, there's also a model local law available in the NRI guidebook that can be customized and used to formally adopt the NRI and integrate it into municipal land use decision-making. The city of Poughkeepsie adopted this version of this law back in 2019, which requires consultation of the NRI in conjunction with all reviews subject to SEQR. And so they have been applying that, and it requires a basic resource analysis and evaluation of potential environmental impacts based on the NRI. The town of Mount Kisco down in Westchester County also adopted a version of that law for their NRI, but it's more limited in scope. It only applies to projects requiring an environmental impact statement. So there's 2 different examples of how that's been customized at the local level. And for those of you seeking climate smart community certification, I'll just point out that adopting an NRI by local law does give you additional points. Completing an NRI itself is worth, it's kind of a high point action in that program, and adopting the local law can get you some extra points. Okay, so even without a formal law though, as Gretchen demonstrated, the NRI can be integrated into environmental reviews, including site plan and subdivision reviews. You can use your own personalized internal checklist that you could create to go through information from the NRI as you're reviewing projects, or you could consider adding application requirements for information that would be obtained from the NRI. So for example, you could consider requiring site plan or subdivision applications to include maps showing the proximity of the proposed project to large forests or large meadow areas, the natural heritage important areas for rare animals, priority farmland, maybe aquifers, etc. And these requirements could make use of the county's online mapping system, that Geodata portal, which is a free way to produce maps, including parcel boundaries on it. So it wouldn't necessarily add an expense to the applicant to do that. In addition to requiring the maps, you might require applicants to address potential impacts of their project on the natural resources that have been identified. For projects, Type 1 or unlisted actions subject to State Environmental Quality Review or SEQR, you can use the NRI to ensure a more thorough and consistent look at potential environmental impacts. This includes using the NRI to verify the responses of an applicant's Part 1 of the environmental assessment form, as well as identifying features that may have been overlooked, that the resources that aren't part of that standard checklist on the EAF form, but that warrant consideration as part of the SEQR review. This information can be used by the review agency to determine places where maybe additional site level surveys might be warranted, such as for a wetland delineation or a habitat assessment, if there's an indication of high quality habitat present or nearby. Our NRI guidebook, which I have a copy of here, it's on our website, has a case study from the town of Rhinebeck in Dutchess County, which codified this type of procedure through a standardized site resource assessment checklist in their subdivision regulations. And applicants are required to fill out this checklist and provide a site resource analysis map showing some of these features. And the planning board uses a pre-application meeting to review the information with the applicant, and that provides the basis for a site design process that begins with identifying these important natural and cultural resources and figuring out on the basis of that which areas are more suitable for development on the site and which areas should be set aside for open space requirements under the subdivision rules. And that process also allows the planning board and the applicant to address these concerns very early in the process before costly engineering designs have been undertaken, and that helps streamline the review in addition to reducing the environmental impacts. There are some other ways that the NRI can be integrated to local subdivision regulations. Similar to that Rhinebeck example, the NRI could be referenced in cluster or conservation subdivisions regulations to guide the open space preservation selection process on a site. Sensitive resource areas, including steep slopes, wetlands, or floodplains, for example, can also be excluded from density calculations in subdivision regulations, and I think the town of Germantown may have an example of that in Columbia County. And this on the bottom is just showing that conservation or cluster subdivision design, conventional subdivision versus a cluster subdivision that begins with a site resource analysis to identify priority natural features and farmland in this case, and the subdivision is designed to try to minimize the overall impacts to the highest priority features. Under SEQR regulations, local governments can also designate critical environmental areas, which are areas that have unique or exceptional environmental characteristics, and it helps bring attention to those places during SEQR, especially for things that don't have that standardized checkbox on the EAF form. And communities across the state have used this to designate features including important aquifers or reservoir protection areas, high quality stream corridors, significant wildlife habitats, ridge lines and steep slope areas, etc., and other features. So what this means is that the lead agency, which is typically the planning board, has to evaluate potential impacts to the CEA qualities and along with other potential environmental impacts that are assessed during SEQR. And it's, in my opinion, one of the less or least obtrusive ways to bring attention to a priority resource, short of establishing local zoning or environmental regulations over that feature. But it still kind of formalizes attention and brings attention during the environmental review to that resource. The town of Hyde Park used a lot of the similar sort of data that you can get from the County NRI to designate 4 CEAs back in 2009, including Hogback Hill, which is one of the largest remaining forest blocks in Hyde Park, and it also happens to have important habitat for the Blandings turtle, sea threatened species, and some other important habitat values. So the designation itself simply requires putting together a map of the boundary and a justification document describing the resources that are present and their sensitivities. It's important to note that the CEA designation does not actually protect land. It doesn't create any new regulation or restriction in land use. In Columbia County, there's only one town that's designated CEA so far, that is Greenport, and they designated a CEA for source water protection around some their municipal wells for the public water supply. And just recently, the town of New Lebanon was awarded a technical assistance award from our program to work with us and Hudsonia on developing a CEA proposal. So perhaps soon there'll be at least one other example of CEAs in Columbia County. CEAs can be a starting point for conservation overlay zoning, which is a commonly used zoning tool for natural resource protection that can restrict density or allowed uses in the underlying zone. The map on the right shows Hillsdale's aquifer overlay zone, which was established to protect and maintain the quality of the town's water supply. And it basically requires that review boards and the building department evaluate potential impacts to the aquifer when they're reviewing and permitting new development. Other natural resource protection tools commonly used in zoning include establishing buffers or setbacks along sensitive features like streams and water bodies or wetlands, and the requirements for open space preservation in subdivisions, as I've mentioned before. The County NRI, I'm going to jump along to comprehensive planning, is the County NRI can really help inform comprehensive planning, and I almost feel like I should have started with this because the comp plan is really the foundation for your zoning and land use decisions, and it establishes the vision and roadmap for a community's growth and development, but can also establish the blueprint for conservation of natural resources. And they're very important because they provide the legal basis, the foundation for those future land use decisions and establishment of local zoning. So if your community wants to advance environmental planning or zoning updates, it's important that those are clearly tied to goals and recommendations in your comprehensive plan. So if there's a comp plan update getting started in your town, it's a great time to get involved and bring attention to these issues. There are a couple of ways to advance environmental planning through the comp plan, and those include providing a good natural resources inventory as part of the plan's inventory and analysis, preferably identifying some priority areas in the community that you want to bring attention to, including some basic conservation principles, and identifying some specific policy recommendations. So I'll talk specifically about the inventory, and many comp plans typically have a fairly light natural resources inventory that provides, in this example, it shows wetlands, major streams, floodplains, steep slopes, ag districts, all very important things and good things to include in your comp plan inventory. But my main point is that there's more information, definitely more critical resources out there that probably warrant consideration in planning and zoning. And you can draw on the information that's in the Columbia County NRI to figure out what additional information you might want to bring in to your comp plan analysis. So the County NRI is really valuable because it makes so much information available to all of the municipalities in Columbia County, along with having this spectacular online map viewing system that you'll learn about more on Wednesday, hopefully. But some communities may be inspired to create their own NRI beyond the overview that's typically included in the comp plan. Comp plans, sometimes if you have a municipal comprehensive NRI, sometimes those are included as an appendix to the comp plan, but typically what's included in the comp plan is a little bit more basic. So in this case, we already have had 2 communities complete NRIs that have drawn on information from the County NRI, and those are the City of Hudson and Town of Hillsdale. Doing a municipal level inventory has several benefits. You can describe and focus on local features in your town or your community and priorities in greater detail. And perhaps you can focus some time and fill in gaps in the data that perhaps don't have as much detail as you would like at the county level. So for example, in Hudson, the CAC used this project to update their street tree inventory, and they also dug into some issues around open space access and use in the city. They were also lucky to get Hudsonia to come in and help with some habitat mapping. In the Town of Hillsdale's case, they included some more fine-grained stream mapping in this map shown here than was available in the county inventory. They also inventoried local farm operations and undertook some field surveys at several sites around the town and identified or documented some rare plants. So there's value to that local perspective for sure. And if you're interested in developing a local NRI, you can reach out to our program for more information. With the county inventory available, some communities may feel ready to embark on open space planning, which goes more in depth into conservation planning than typically found in a comp plan. An open space plan typically includes more substantive community engagement and input to identify priority conservation areas and strategies, which can include protection or acquisition, creation of new parks and preserves, but often, also includes land use strategies and stewardship strategies and other sources of funding and technical assistance. So this is an example from the town of Saugerties across the river. And we're just getting started on an open space planning project through a partnership with a Cornell University Planning Department studio class that'll run this fall, where we're going to be working with 2 communities in Columbia County to start work on open space plans. So hopefully you will also have some local examples to draw on soon as well. So I do want to mention that we have a great grants program available, and there's currently a round of funding for local stewardship planning projects, including projects for natural resource inventories and open space plans and a variety of other things mentioned here. So encourage you to look into this opportunity. The deadline for that is June 2nd. And if there's time, I'm happy to answer a question or two before we go to breakout discussions. I also want to make a quick pitch for our own webinar series, the Conservation and Land Use webinars that are monthly. We're just wrapping up a series about wetland protection and have a webinar this Wednesday about wetland regulations and local laws and strategies. And in June, we'll be having a webinar about scenic resource protection featuring a new guidebook that was developed on this topic. So thank you very much.
It looks like everybody's back from our rooms, and a couple folks had to head out, but in our last 10 minutes, we have time to hear from someone from each breakout room, a little bit about the uses of the NRI that you talked about in the breakouts. And then we have time for kind of final questions in the next 10 minutes or so. And then just some final messages before we wrap up. So let's see, the first group back in this room was Barbara Huey's group. Is there someone from that group who wants to share a little bit about uses of the NRI or your conversation?
Yeah, I took a few notes. We had Maureen from Austerlitz, Bruce from New Lebanon, Don Persick from Chatham, and myself from Germantown. And we talked about the possibility of the NRI being used for wetland protection and development planning, considering natural resource aspects, especially forest protection. We talked about the fact that New Lebanon has already had established a municipal, something like an NRI called the Natural Resource Planning Tool, and that's already been brought to bear on certain considerations, but that there's also a climate smart community effort happening there, and that same kind of tool is at work. And using this information for adjusting attitudes and sharing data that is already legitimized by the existence of the NRI. We all shared the importance of that. And town of Chatham is redoing after quite a while, a new comprehensive plan. So this tool is going to be really useful for that, and the importance of identifying habitats and maybe developing some farmland protections. I pointed out that in Germantown, we're doing climate smart community that will require a municipal NRI, and we're also doing the local waterfront revitalization plan, again, concerned with many levels of environmental issues and our tidal floodplains and the Rojan Creek as it enters the Hudson, and So we'll be using the county plan as a baseline for establishing a lot of things about those efforts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So in my breakout room list, the next room was headed up by Gretchen Stevens, was facilitating there. Gretchen, or someone from that group, would you like to share a little bit from your conversation?
Yeah, so we had representatives from the town and village of Kinderhook, from Gallatin, and from Chatham, and one mysterious person on the phone who we couldn't hear. There was interest in possibly using the NRI to apparently Kinderhook has been working on an amendments to a solar law, and that has the law which ran into lots of opposition, and there were probably some problems with it, but the NRI it seemed like might be useful as a reference in a solar law, so that the natural resources of concern are at least considered in the siting of new utility scale solar developments. There was interest possibly from Gallatin in a municipal NRI, developing a municipal NRI using some of the information from the county-wide NRI. And I did mention, I don't remember if Ingrid mentioned this in her presentation, but the Hudson River Estuary program has, at least in the past and probably in the future, provided grants to municipalities who are seeking to prepare their own natural resource inventories. So there is or may be funding to help support that work. Often those grants are used to hire a consultant, whether it's a mapping person or someone else. There was a question about how if you're going to undertake a municipal NRI, what kinds of qualifications or expertise would you want on your committee that is doing the work? And I started to answer that. I didn't get very far, but I did say these are substantial projects. They take a lot of time. So you want people who have the time. You would want to have someone with some mapping capability, or else you'd want to be able to hire someone with GIS capability. Apart from that, just people who have an interest in planning, in natural history, in anything, biology, geology, people who have some interest and knowledge in the kinds of things that are covered in an NRI can be very helpful in figuring out the scope of your document and the kinds of content that you want to include. So, gathering that kind of group would be very helpful for that effort.
Thanks, Gretchen. Room number 3 was Ingrid Haeckel is facilitating that room. So would you like to share, or someone from your room?
Sure. Yeah, it was myself and Tim Stalker from from Austerlitz and the County Planning Board, and one of your new board members, Peter Reed, and we talked about the value and utility of the NRI for Austerlitz's comp planning effort, and also in relation to a ridgeline protection overlay district that's been proposed, and just the real strength of having all this information available through the county map viewer. And there was also just some interest in the issue of how this information is being received by others, and the kind of the balancing of conservation and siting of new development. So I
Thanks,
enjoyed the
Ingrid.
conversation.
And let's see, is Michael O'Hara with us? Michael?
He is. In our group, we had two people from Valatia and one from Stuyvesant. So the conversation centered around, for a little while longer, in Valatia, one of the members of the planning organization and another from the zoning, and who the planner is also working for the New York State Parks, and was quite familiar with all of the tools that the state has for this sort of thing. But of course, the county one is more specifically geared to the needs of Columbia County. And neither of these towns has a specific NRI for the town, but they were both looking forward to learning more about the online application, as well as utilizing what resources are available in the book. So the waterfront areas of Stuyvesant, down by Nut and Hook, and of course the two creeks that run through Valatia. So good
Great,
chat.
thanks, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
We're down to our final couple of minutes. Rick, do you have a couple things to share from the group you were with?
You're muted.
Okay, so sorry. We had a nice group. It was Hillary from Hudson and Carol from Gallatin, as well as Henry Corson from Chatham. Unfortunately, Henry had to leave right after our breakout session, so he's not here anymore. But we talked about how the town of Chatham is launching an open space planning process with CLC and Cornell, and I believe the Estuary program as well. So, and how the use of NRIs are integral to comprehensive plan review, which is happening also in the town of Chatham. So there's a lot of moving parts there that we talked about. We talked about how Hudson has its own NRI. I think I got that right, Hillary. And yes, good. And then we talked about how crazy it is that the village of Chatham is divided between Ghent and Chatham. And so that means that there are no water and sewer districts in the town of Chatham, except inside the village. So the town doesn't have access to water and sewer at all. Everything is on septic in the town of Chatham. So outside the village, that is. And
Thanks,
that's
Rick.
about it.
Thank you. In our final minute, many of you are returning tomorrow evening, which is fantastic for the 1 hour session specifically on the online map tool and accessing the data that's in the NRI. I wanted to thank again Ingrid Haeckel and Gretchen Stevens for their presentations this evening, and to share my screen, if I can manage this while talking at the same time to not be inefficient with time, to just mention the sponsors for our event here. And so several organizations have been mentioned already this evening, and just to thank them for partnering both in supporting the creation of the NRI in prior years, and then being able to make these trainings possible and these workshops possible to continue to get the word out and connect with people who are interested in using the NRI document.